Good evening and welcome to Face to Face. I'm your host Adam Jasser. I'm joined here in our Warsaw studio by Michał Broniatowski, Editor-in-Chief of TVP World. Michał, welcome.
Hello.
The mother of all topics we will discuss today is of course Donald Trump's victory in the US presidential race. But we will also take a look at the prospect of snap elections in Germany. So, Michał, what has happened? Why did Americans elect a convicted felon, nearly impeached? Someone called him a threat to democracy. Many people actually called him a threat to democracy. And yet he won a convincing victory.
Well, exactly. This democracy brought him back to the White House despite all of that you're saying. He's the candidate of the majority of Americans, simple as that. And we may be surprised why this happened, why Americans, despite all these strange things, to say the least, decided to overwhelmingly make him the president. I think the main thing is that he is not a typical political leader who is usually responsible for his words, for his deeds, for his misbehavior. He is something like a leader of a movement, revered by his followers.
But traditionally, to win in America, you need the middle ground. You need the sort of silent majority. And it seems that in almost every demographic, he won. So what was driving this switch to him?
I think this middle is, in this case, is part of this pack, which accounts for more than 50% of Americans. And I think we may leave it to historians, this thing, because it really doesn't matter now for us. It will be big historical books written about what happened. I think that more important, of course, is what happened for us.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned this because, you know, in Europe, obviously, and in Poland and in our part of the world, people are concentrating on foreign policy issues. But from the exit polls, it seems that the number one issue for most Americans was inflation and high prices. And among those voters who identified that as the top priority, over 70%, I think, voted for Trump.
Economy is stupid.
I thought it was politics stupid. Now it turns out it's economy stupid again.
Well, it never ceased to be the most important factor. And, you shouldn't expect American or any voters in any country in the world to choose a leader based on his attitude in international relations. It is just the result of who they elect, but not they elect him because he may be more blunt.
Yes, so it's a reminder to Europeans that foreign policy is not the critical factor. Yeah. Nevertheless, we have to discuss this because, as you rightly pointed out, you know, this is on our minds, and the top issue on our minds is, of course, Ukraine. And Trump has repeatedly said that he can bring peace to Ukraine even before he's sworn in as president, basically on day one. Okay, there's some exaggeration there, obviously, but, you know, is this a realistic prospect that he can really achieve something?
No, you know, he's a part of the system when he becomes the president, so of course he takes final decision, but these decisions about war or peace are usually educated decisions, and in this case, you know, he cannot impose on Ukraine some concessions, because this would mean that he supports Putin, who is on the other side a client of China. He depends on China political support. He depends on China supplies of spare parts to his planes and rockets. He also depends on, as of a few days ago or a few weeks ago, he depends on North Korean human fodder.
Right, but isn't that a factor that can actually stiffen Trump's approach to Russia? You know, some of his proxies, you know, people who pretend that they speak on his behalf, are saying, you know, Trump will ask Putin to stop the war. If Putin refuses, then Trump is going to provide as many weapons to Ukraine as it needs.
If it were that simple, I think Mr. Biden would have done that. You know, there are so many factors in it which have to be taken into account. First thing is that whether it would be him or Mrs. Harris to win these elections, it was obvious for everybody that America, while talking to Europe, would in fact look back to the West, to Pacific. And we have to remember that when America looks towards Pacific Ocean, it is not only China. It's Russia, the part of this quadrangle of adversaries or axis of disruptors, and this is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So, in such case, he cannot, openly support or be friendly to Russia. Because it would be inconsistent with what is the vision of American international politics.
So from what you're saying, it seems to me that some of these very pessimistic voices about him potentially selling out and, sort of leaving Ukraine defenseless and abandoning Ukraine, this is exaggerated.
This is exaggerated, and don't forget that he's a businessman in politics. We have seen it, we saw it already 4 years ago when he was the president, and we will see it this time. The war is always good for economy, and look at America after the First and Second World Wars, a huge growth which was fueled by the support of America in war effort of other countries. Same case here. There are sudden $1 billion orders for American weapons, not only from Ukraine, but also from countries like Poland, which is providing its own weapons to Ukraine, but needs to resupply its own arm. And so it makes orders for Americans. So why stop this?
Right. Well, speaking of Poland, Georgette Mosbach, she told the Polish press agency that Trump's victory is good news for Poland because he sees the country as the top US ally in NATO and a leading nation in the EU.
He may be right, because...
She may be right, or he may be right. Both of them may be
she's right to say that Trump is, because he indeed will see Poland as one of the major players, both in NATO eastern flank and in the European Union. Two main countries of the European Union, France and Germany, are in this array. We will discuss Germany in a second. And a few weeks ago, we could see performance of Prime Minister Tusk, the former chairman of the Council of the European Council, and who came to Brussels for the meeting of the European Commission and convince everybody at the table to take a decision which was very difficult for the last decade. And suddenly he comes and in 3 hours,
right?
And he convinces them to lift the right for asylum for illegal migrants. So both Mrs. Mosbach and Trump may be right that Poland becomes a real player.
Speaking of Brussels, again, the war in Ukraine and the security issues aren't the only challenges the Trump presidency poses to the Europeans. Another one is trade. Trump said that tariffs are his favorite word in the dictionary. And he has threatened to impose up to 20% tariffs on goods from Europe. And, Europe is already mired in stagnation. And this may affect countries such as Poland and our region as well, because we're dependent on the car industry and so on and so forth. So how do you see this playing out?
Well, he will definitely do something about tariffs, and it will be ugly from our point of view, because not only he will impose tariffs of European goods up to 20%, but also he was talking about imposing across the board tariffs on Chinese goods of 60%. What happens in such case? The Chinese goods cheap Chinese goods will start looking for market in the rest of the world, and especially in Europe, which is rich, right? So this means a big new competition for European producers. If not Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, tariffs should be considered as a major, most important threat to the future of European economy.
So if I understand you correctly, this actually may become a more tricky issue or trickier issue than the security considerations, right? Do you think that the leaders, the EU leaders who are currently meeting in Budapest, are they going to discuss this, or this is going to be dealt with later?
I think both issues should be discussed and will be discussed. Tariffs is not very trendy in terms of media. It's difficult to make big news on tariffs unless you impose 60% one day, but next day people forget, and then it's up to entrepreneurs and politicians to cope with this. But of course, a part of tariffs and a part of Ukraine, there'll be also a question of creating a European response to all these matters, especially in the field of building European military might. Europe must start producing its own weapons, and because you cannot produce 27 types of one rifle, you have to produce something like Americans. They have one tank, they have a line of airplanes which are more or less compatible with each other, while in Europe many countries are producing different things. So unification of that and financing defense buildup in Europe will be...
Well, but forgive me for interrupting you here, but Europeans are terribly divided on this issue because...
Well, they have to unify.
Well, but Mr. Trump will just prefer to sell the American weapons to Europe because, as you mentioned at the beginning, he's a businessman, he's transactional. So
you're right. He will play on bilateral relations, but this is exactly why we have the European Union, to be a union, to create our defense against Russia or any other aggressor. So, there's one very good development which is now happening in Brussels. They are now accepting proposed commissioners, and a proposed commissioner for defense and space is going to be...
Defense and space.
Yeah. Was almost practically approved. Former twice Prime Minister of Lithuania, Andris Kubilius, and he's the man of action, the man who is convinced that the only way to avoid war is to prepare for this war, and I think he's a good choice.
Well, I will sound like a broken record probably a little bit, but it seems to me that none of these really important issues and this European unity is impossible to achieve without Germany getting its act together. And what we've been seeing for the past several months is internal strife in the ruling coalition of Chancellor Scholz. And it came to a head this week when he fired the finance minister, Christoph Lindner, from the Liberal Party. And there is a possibility there will be an early election in March next year. So, how can Germany contribute positively to some of these discussions you're mentioning if it's in such a disarray?
This is a huge problem because Germany, a lame duck in Europe, is not a good sign for Europe, especially while accompanied by another lame duck, France. But this is
well, at least President Macron is still in charge of foreign policy. It's clear who's in charge, and his mandate is still, 2-3 years, right?
Yes, but
whereas
still his government can collapse within any time from now.
Right.
And he will be forced to agree for a government who would be led by extreme right. So You never know. But Germany is key here, and Germany is in disarray. Germany has no clear policy towards Ukraine. It is rebuilding its army, but it's taking time. It's delayed by red tape and so on. So I think that the person who should be worried most by what happened on Tuesday, on the first Tuesday of November in the US, should be President Zelensky and the Ukrainian nation, because if it happens so that Trump will maybe not turn his head away from them, but will ease on supporting Ukraine, it will be hard to convince unanimous to get the unanimous response of Europe to it.
Right. What should Poland do in such a case? You know, we just discussed the fact that Poland's position in the EU and NATO is elevated compared to a few years back. There are a few like-minded countries on the eastern flank, the Nordic countries, the Baltics. Can you see some new formats emerging to push the agenda forward?
You know, the you named these countries, Baltic countries, and the newcomers into NATO, which are Sweden and especially Finland. These and Romania on the other side to the south of Europe. I think that these countries will be pushing, and I think that Poland will be the leader of this group, because people who are in charge of Polish foreign policy and defense policy are very outspoken about what the world should do to support Ukraine, and why we have to support Ukraine in their plight, because they are just our proxies against the aggressor.
Do you think a potential change in government in Germany towards a more right-wing government would change the picture, make Germany more decisive on some of these issues, or this is wishful thinking?
I think at the moment it's like looking into
crystal ball.
Crystal ball, yes. But if, say, Christian Democrats win election next year, almost certainly they will not get majority for to become a single to build one-party government. They will have to be joined probably by liberals, and liberals are for a very stringent budget policies, which means also saving on military. So this way bad, the other way badly, even worse. I don't know how will we be commenting all this situation in half-year time.
Right, but at least from the public statements by the CDU, the Christian Democratic Party in Germany, they seem to be much more robust when it comes to defense, when it comes to the transatlantic unity, and also on Ukraine. Well, this could be just because they're in opposition now, so they want to criticize
exactly. This is
government.
What I want.
But maybe there's a fundamental reason there.
Well, you know, historically they are more outspoken against Russia and the Soviet bloc. Remember that the Chancellor of the German unity was the Christian Democrat.
So we give them a bit of a chance.
Yes.
A credit.
A credit.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Michał.
Thank you.
You watched Face to Face. I'm Adam Jasser. Thank you and see you next week.